So there we go. Okay. So tonight I'd like to invite David Robertson to share with us the slides that he's prepared, presentation he's prepared about Ontario's energy future, which is right now coming to the forefront with a report called an IRRP, a regional report, a regional plan for electricity future that is being done by the IESO, Independent Electricity Systems Operator. So I'm grateful to David for coming and sharing with us. I know him as we're both part of the Seniors for Climate Action Network Ontario project group. And so I had the chance to see the presentation that David's going to share tonight. And I'm very grateful for your research and the knowledge that you're bringing to us tonight, David. So I'm going to hand things over to you now. And thank you.
Hey. And thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. This is a kind of briefing on what the IESO is planning for Toronto's energy future. The IESO is the Independent Electricity System Operator. It does a number of things. First of all, it balances the supply and demand for electricity 24/7, 365 days a year. It is also responsible for planning for the future electricity growth in regions all around the province. And unfortunately, and increasingly, it does what the Ford government tells it to do. A series of legislative initiatives have made that the case. The goal of the IESO, which is to build a reliable, affordable, sustainable electricity system, has now been completely compromised by the Ford government. So the IESO, in planning for the future of energy, has a number of planning regions around Toronto, around the province. Tonight, we're focused on what is going on in the Toronto region, because we are at a 5-year planning cycle in Toronto, and they've developed what they call an Integrated Regional Resource Plan, IRRP, lots of acronyms, sorry. So basically, what they're doing is they're trying to answer two questions. One, how much power is needed over a planning time frame? And this planning time frame is 20 years, right through to 2045. And secondly, what are the best recommendations for actions to address the growth of the electricity needs? That's what this whole process is all about. To the question about Toronto's electricity demand, the IESO is looking out and sees incredible growth, 70% up to 100% growth in the demand for electricity between now and 2045. So on September 25, the IESO held a public engagement webinar to report on its recommendations on how to address that increased demand for electricity. The final report is due on October 31st, a kind of Halloween report, I guess. There's 3 important conclusions that I would draw from looking at the whole process. First of all, the IESO has downplayed the potential of distributed energy resources, energy efficiency, demand response initiatives. It has scaled back what can be achieved by energy savings. Secondly, in its final report, it refuses to commit to the closing of the Portland gas plant. And third, its solution is to develop a third transmission line into Toronto, and they're going to have it as an underwater cable from Bowmanville to Toronto. Toronto's at a critical time now in terms of our thinking about energy futures. The next report, the next planning cycle is 5 years away. That's 2030. By that time, we will have risked missing all of our climate targets if we don't do things right now. So we're at an energy crossroads. There's 2 discernible and very clear paths forward. One is to go with fossil gas and nuclear and to get locked into Ford's bad energy choices, or the other is to commit to renewables and to position Toronto at the forefront of a renewable energy transition. And that is not only about energy, it is about climate, it is about emissions, it is about livable cities, it's about jobs and local development. So the IESO has underestimated energy savings that could be achieved in Toronto, and quite dramatically. It did a study to assess what the potential was to offset future electricity generation and transmission requirements through energy savings. In other words, the more energy savings we get, the less we need nuclear plants and fossil gas plants. When they looked at what the possible energy savings were, they looked at things like the distributed energy resources, including battery storage, behind the meter solar. They So they looked at distributed energy resources, battery storage, solar, energy efficiency measures like heat pumps, and demand response initiatives like EV charging. They also considered what was the potential for these energy savings? And they developed three categories. First of all, they said, what was the technical potential? That is, everything that was technically feasible, regardless of cost effectiveness or consumer awareness or whatever. Then they said, a subset of that is what is economically potential. And that is all the technically feasible measures that could pass a cost effectiveness test. And then a subset of that is what they called the achievable potential. And that was what they thought they could reasonably get and what their goal should be. And the differences are huge. What they found was that the technical potential is absolutely high. It was something like over 7,000 megawatts of capacity by 2045. So then they whittled that down, they scaled it back to what they called the economic potential. That was still a very large number. And then they said, well, we're not going to achieve the economic potential. We can have to be realistic about this. Consumers aren't going to do it. There's not going to be enough technology innovation that gets applied at the household level. So we got to scale it all back to what they ended up with was that green line at the bottom, which they called their achievable potential. The magnitude is quite large. In fact, IESO says this, the overall achievable potential, that is what they are going to, their goal, is about 1/8 of the technical potential. 1/8 of the technical potential. So the difference between the technical potential and what they say is their goal, the achievable potential, is around 6,600 megawatts. That's twice. That is twice the output of the 4 large-scale reactors currently at Darlington. And then the difference even between the economic potential and the achievable potential was 3,200 megawatts. That's equivalent to 8 small modular reactors. In other words, if we got those energy savings that were at the economic potential level, we wouldn't need 8 small modular reactors. And the way they scaled it back, the way they pushed down, the way they lowered their ambition was to underestimate initiatives and to totally disregard some other ones. I'm going to give you one example here. This is a diagram of what they call the vehicle-to-grid bidirectional. Electric vehicles pull power from the grid to charge their batteries, and then when they're not in use, they can provide that power back to the grid. That's called vehicle-to-grid integration. It's making great strides. Already 8 states in America have passed legislation for it. The United States Department of Energy this year published a report that lays out a 10-year roadmap to get to vehicle-to-grid integration. In the UK, there are incentives for that bidirectional. In France, there are incentives for that bidirectional. In Toronto, the IESO said, we're not even going to consider it because it's a pilot project. Remember, the time frame is 20 years. The time frame is out to 2045 at a time when we're supposed to have a tremendous amount of electric vehicles on the road. But they have said they're not putting it in their plan because it is a pilot project. Well, the biggest pilot project in the energy world in Ontario right now is the small modular reactor at Darlington. It has never been built. It has never been hooked up to a grid. No one knows if it's going to work and at what cost and what efficiency levels. But that pilot is okay. The vehicle to grid, they rule out, but the small modular reactor, which is really the pilot project, they endorse. So the IESO set a very low ambition goal on savings. They ignored parking lot solar, balcony solar, plug-in heat pumps. They grossly underestimated rooftop solar. They assumed that consumer take-up of energy-saving technologies would be low, and they assumed that there wouldn't be major new incentive programs. That was a deliberate undervaluing of what could be achieved with energy savings in Toronto. On the second point about the Portland gas plant, the Portland gas plant right now provides about 20% of Toronto's energy needs. It's controversial. It started as a peaker plant. It now runs regularly. And despite local opposition, it is currently expanding its capacity. It is both a climate and a health risk. It is the largest source of greenhouse gases in Toronto. The latest results from 2024 show it has actually increased the discharge of harmful pollutants. Nitrogen oxides up 17% in 1 year, particulate matter up, volatile organic compounds up. These are all killer pollutants. The city, when the IESO started undertaking this plan, said, we want you to plan for the closure of the Portland gas plant. Environmental groups like TER and SCAN are arguing for an earlier closure date by 2030. And it's been made clear by Environmental Defense, Clean Air Alliance, and other studies that alternative sources of electricity are available. But the IESO in its report said this: the IRRP will not make a recommendation for timing to phase out for the Portland Energy Center. That is beyond the scope of the IRRP. And in fact, when offering that conclusion, a spokesperson said, well, some people want the plant closed sooner, some people want it closed later. But the point is to characterize the closure of the gas plant as simply a difference of opinion, I think, is really irresponsible. Which brings us to what they do want. They don't want energy savings in a way that we could achieve them. They don't want to close the Portland gas plant, or they don't want to make any commitments around that. But what they do want is a third transmission line to bring power into Toronto from outside of Toronto's boundaries. So it is proposing an underwater cable capable of transmitting about 900 megawatts of power. It's going to run underwater from Bowmanville, Toronto East Waterfront. The IESO has estimated the cost to be about $1.5 billion, but said it could well be double that. Here's the problem. What generates the electricity carried in the cable? Where does that energy come from? And in Ontario, we know what's happening. In fact, that third line to Toronto is going to be carrying electricity that is generated by more gas plants and is generated by more nuclear plants. In fact, by 2050, probably 75% of our electricity grid will be nuclear. That's what's going to power the line. And where does that come from? The fossil gas plants will come from the fracking fields in the northern eastern United States. We know that. We get 70% of our fossil gas from the fracking fields in America. We'll continue to do that. The small modular reactor at Darlington and the other 3 at Darlington that are going to be built are the first time in Canadian history that we are using a foreign design. We're using a foreign technology. It's produced by the GE Vernova Hitachi Nuclear Energy Company, which is headquartered in the United States. And they're the ones that are building the SMR, or at least the design of the SMR. Another first for Canada is we are now going to use enriched uranium for the first time in our history. The CANDU reactor, one of its safeguard and selling features was it didn't need enriched uranium. The small modular reactor does. And that enriched uranium is going to come from the United States. And both of those points reinforce our energy dependence on America at a time where we should be arguing for greater energy independence. So to clear the way for its preferred choices, that is a third line that's hooked up to the grid, and that grid is supplied by nuclear power and fossil gas. In order to clear the way for its preferred choices, the IESO has provided low ambition estimates for the potential energy savings from energy efficiency and demand response. It has seriously underestimated the potential for rooftop solar. It has rejected out of hand offshore wind. It has screened out a wide range of technical innovations such as balcony solar and parking lot solar. It has refused to consider the peak shaving, load shifting, and demand response provided by electric vehicle grid integration, and it has refused to comment on phasing out the Portland gas plant. The IESO has made a choice. Its choice is the Ford government's commitment to fossil gas and nuclear, and renewables will fade into the background or at least be shunted to the sidelines. There are big consequences for this. One of them is that it's going to force Toronto residents into the highest cost electricity options possible. Equally important is Toronto is going to lose out on the innovative and transformative opportunities of renewable energy and climate action. This closes off the energy transition that we need to build in Toronto. So a number of environmental groups have got together. I think maybe Lynn or some others, we may talk a bit more about this later. We've got together, we've been meeting to think about what do we do about this IESO plan that is so wrong-headed for the future of Toronto. So we've developed a joint statement criticizing the IRP, and we have urged Toronto Council to reject its recommendations and to restart the process. In order to kind of build awareness of our opposition to the IESO report, we've got a media event scheduled for October 28th at City Hall in Toronto to try to alert the press and to alert councillors to it. And in the next few weeks, we're going to meet with as many councillors as possible to say, we need to take a hard look at the recommendations of the IESO and that we need to shift. And here are the demands in the joint statement or the proposals. A clear timeline for phasing out the Portland energy plant. We got to maximize local renewable energy. We have to expand energy storage. We have to implement energy efficiency programs. We have to explore innovative solutions as vehicle to grid integration, and we need to revisit the offshore wind potential in Lake Ontario. And if we do those things, then maybe what we will do is shift away from a future of nuclear, costly nuclear, untried nuclear, and expensive fossil gas towards a renewable future in which Toronto can be at the forefront of an energy transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We would now like to open for questions, discussion. And I think I'll start by first of all saying that we have an action happening at City Council. So one of the, as David has sort of talked about, we want to get City Council to take action. We want them to object to this report that we expect to see released on October 31st. And we expect it to look a lot like the draft report on which we've based this presentation and many responses from environmental organizations. So we want to alert the city to our concerns and really encourage them to take action. So one of the things we're going to do to help make that happen is to go to City Hall on noon on the 28th, next Tuesday. So if any of you can make it, we'd really appreciate you coming. We're going to do a little bit of a street theater event, and it will involve you also putting money in the pot where you want the money to go. You want it to go to...
Not your money.
Pardon?
Not your money.
No,
fake money.
We'll be providing some money, some demonstration money, and or into conservation and renewables. So we'll have those two jars going. We'll have some figures with who are dressed up, in different ways. We will alert the councillors to the fact that we're there, but we also want to have serious outreach done to the councillors. So we coming to the end of our session today, which will be at 8 o'clock. So we'll go for the next half hour. We'll have discussion, and if you'd like to be involved in some way, maybe you can say so at that point. We just have 17 people on this call right now, so we'd love to hear from you. You can put your comment or question in the chat, or you can raise your hand as Linda and Anna have just done, and we'll take your comments and questions for David. Okay, thank you so much. Linda, why don't you start?
Thanks, Ben. So I'm just wanting to follow the thread through. So we let city councilors know as much as we can over the next couple of weeks and through the event on the 28th. We let them know how displeased we are with what we expect to hear through this report and what we want them to hear. But then what happens? Can they do something?
Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah, go ahead, David.
We're asking them to, well, there's a number of pieces here that, interestingly enough, just in this past June, in the mayor's report in terms of responding to the US tariffs, council passed a series of resolutions. One of them was to develop what they called the Renewable Advantage Report. They're asking Toronto Hydro, the city staff, the Atmospheric Fund to come together to meet with stakeholders and to develop a renewable, the renewable advantage, they call it. And I think that's important. I think that the city has to signal strongly to the IESO that it wants to go in a different direction than the IESO is laying out. Can the city reject the plan? Or this is about the politics with the Ford government? Or will the Ford government just say, well, we've heard you. We also know you wanted to close the Portland glass plant. We ignored you on that. We're going to ignore you on this because we're driving ahead on our nuclear fossil gas expansion. But to the degree that we start building some opposition in the city, it's not just opposition, it's the opportunity to start developing alternatives. And I think that the city council resolution in June opened the door to the development of those alternatives. So we'll always be able to put alternatives against what the IESO is doing. But it's politics, as you said.
We need to generate momentum for the solutions we want to see. That requires organizing, standing up. Okay, Anna, you're next.
Thanks. This was a very interesting and informative presentation, so thank you, David. My question is on, the IESO, you're saying that they lost their independence. I guess it's a two-part question. So the first question is like, how have they lost their independence over time? Like, is it that the IESO changed their decision-making process, or is it just kind of like behind the scenes, you know, political forces getting really strong and it's kind of just like the current political moment that we don't really know how they lost their independence, but it's just sort of happened. And then my second question is what structural changes need to happen within ISO and their decision-making process in order for them to become independent from, I guess, the Ford government.
There's a lot in there in that question. A couple of comments, I guess, that that there have been a couple of pieces of legislation that have actually changed the mandate of the IESO. For instance, Bill 214 changed the mandate of the IESO by having it support what they called beneficial electrification. In other words, beneficial electrification is a concept that says if you create more emissions in your electricity sector, but those emissions can offset some emissions elsewhere, then that's a good thing, and you should do that. So that's basically what is now part of the mandate of the IESO, and that commits the IESO to fossil gas. Bill 40, which had first reading in June and is up again for second reading now that the House has reconvened, actually changes its mandate to include economic growth, not getting the best deal for Ontario consumers, but economic growth. So what happens when the demands of economic growth are contrary to the needs of consumers for reasonable electricity? So that's another way that the IESO has had its mandate change. It's also clear that when the IESO put forth a procurement that was supposed to be for renewables, 1,500 megawatts of renewables, the minister stepped in and said, no, it's not renewables. It has to be technology agnostic. As a result of that, the procurement is now being filled by fossil gas plants, and renewables are shunted again to the sidelines. The government also just introduced what is called its integrated energy plan. And in its integrated energy plan, it basically said that that energy is about economic growth, and the regulatory apparatus of the state is to support that plan. And so those are direct ways. Now, with the IESO, absent all of that, do anything different? I don't know. There are indications along the way that it has, like the procurement, the LP2 procurement was for renewables. That got changed by the government. So it's a complicated issue. But the problem is right now, the IESO sees its role as achieving the Ontario government's energy and economic goals. I
Could I
don't, if,
ask a follow-up to that? Just to pick up on one quick thing, and it will be the last thing.
And
Um,
then Ushnish is next. Okay.
oh, okay, yes, perfect. So you mentioned that kind of like economic growth is being put ahead instead of cost effectiveness and the interest of consumers. Um, where is the role of the Ontario Energy Board, which my understanding is to protect consumers? Like, what is the relationship between ISO and the OEB in this picture?
sorry, folks, I've just lost you all.
Okay, did you hear the
Okay,
question?
yes, I did hear the question. I'm sorry that I hit some wrong buttons here. The OEB is also in the same situation as the IESO in terms of recall Bill 165, which completely changed the independence of the Ontario Energy Board. Because when the Ontario Energy Board tried to say that there would be no longer privileged access or privileged gas hookups in new subdivisions, that the gas companies would have to pay for it, the government stepped in and overruled the Ontario Energy Board and changed its mandate. Bill 40 also changes the mandate of the Ontario Energy Board. So the regulatory tribunals that we have are being, constrained, corralled, reined in to do what the Ford government wants to do. And that's to become an energy superpower built on small modular reactors, new nuclear, and fossil gas plants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ushnish?
Hi. So I was trying to make my way through IESO documents, and one document I read was the annual planning outlook. And I guess my question is, anybody looking at like the new demands for energy and where they're coming from? And my interest is really data centers. Like, can we have fewer data centers, smaller data centers, more energy efficient data centers? Um, like, how do we reduce those sources of demand?
I think that's a question that goes to the core and to the heart of discussions about energy futures. To start a discussion about energy future should start with the point of view that says, how do we reduce energy demand? Not how do we inflate it? How do we look at forecasts and say, well, let's not do that. Let's not demand that much energy. But there's two issues here. One is energy and one is electricity. And when I look at Toronto, I think that maybe that the IESO's projections or forecasts for Toronto are not unreasonable, given the growth in population, given the push for electrification, the introduction of more heat pumps, more electric vehicles, mass transit moving more to being electrified. So I think maybe some of those demands are reasonable. What I don't think is reasonable is the Ontario demands that the government has put forward, which says there needs to be 50,000 megawatts of new energy between now and 2050. I think those are kind of trumped up demands. And I think that in part they're based on things like the Ontario government wanting to attract big data centers and AI, that it wanting to provide industry cheaper sources of electricity subsidized by us as it currently is. So I think those are those are real issues around that projected demand. So, but I think your point is that where we should start the discussion is thinking about reducing energy demand, because we know that energy growth and economic growth is taking us all to tipping, planetary boundaries. There are what, 9 planetary boundaries, and I think that we are at the tipping point on 7 of those already. And that has to do with growth. We just can't keep extracting and consuming and ravaging the planet the way we're doing it. And that means thinking differently about energy demands. And that also brings up issues like, how do you think about cities? How do you design neighborhoods and design cities? All of that kind of starts coming together in a different path forward.
Yes, thank you, David. And I'll use this opportunity. Got Linda next, but right now I'll just say that on November 5th, you might want to peg that date, we will come back. We'll have another one of these open special meetings, which you can also sign up for with the newsletter at climatefast.ca. And that will be on buildings, on how we can get the retrofits and electrification of buildings that we need and get buildings off gas. So reducing our demand, as David is just talking about right now, which is a big part of the Transform TO plan that will be coming to council in December. So one of my concerns about this IESO plan is that it's going to completely undermine the city's ability to realize our Transform TO goals. It's just going to take that right out of our hands, which is completely unfair to the city, which is trying to be responsible and do our part of reducing energy demand. So keep in mind that we will have another session, November 5th, around the green buildings, the retrofit plans that we hope will be part of what Transform TO adopts. And so with that said, I will pass things over to Linda.
For me?
Yes.
Okay. So is this going to be debated at council next week?
No.
The IESO?
No. First of all, I don't that we've talked to some of our councillors. They probably cannot respond when it's a draft. Okay, the report has not been released until October 31st. The reason why we're trying to get ahead of that release is that we expect that Ford will very shortly after it's released say, okay, this is what we're doing, right? Like it's a foregone conclusion. The reason why we want to talk to our councillors is we want to find out if there's an opportunity to have them come back, perhaps at the Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting in November, because there will be one in November, to object. We need to know that their objection would pass, that it would be supported by a majority before we get it put on the agenda. Because if it were not to pass, that would weaken what the city said they wanted in June. They said it in June and also July that they want the renewables future, they want the gas plant closed. They said those things, but now they need to say, hey, your plan is not responding to what we asked you for, so we don't accept it. And we don't know if we have a majority on the IEC or on council that will be willing to stand up to the province, because they've got to, publicly object. But it's an important part of building the momentum for change. We need to look at what Toronto Hydro could do to increase use of renewable energies, feeding renewable energy into the grid in Toronto, because that we know is a very important part of reducing the demand on the Portland gas plant, is increasing the renewable energy supply into the grid in Toronto. So we know that the city's looking at that. We know the atmospheric fund is looking at it. Toronto Hydro is looking at it, but we need these groups to all come together and tell the province, no, we're not going to do it your way, right? And so that's why we need to set up meetings with the councillors. So if that's something you're willing to do, you could please put that in the chat. If you're willing to be involved in that, maybe say the name of your councillor, if you know, and we'll try to organize it. I forget now the number of councillors on IEC. There's 7 or 8, I think, and those would be crucial. But they're all, they all would be involved in a vote when it comes to council. Okay. Did you want to add anything to that? Do you have another question, Linda? Your hand's up there still?
Okay, I guess just to clarify a bit further, you have people already organized to meet with councillors, individual councillors, or you're working on that?
We're just working on it, because what we have is a letter that will go to all the councillors that's signed now by 22 groups, Toronto groups, that will go to them. I'm not sure if we're releasing it that day, do you know, David, on Tuesday, or sending it Monday? We might send it Monday with an invitation to attend, to come out and see what the theater thing that we're doing on Tuesday. The report will be released on that Friday, so we're just trying to get a head start on that, to get the, but they care what their constituents raise. Like if they get a number of phone calls at their office about, hey, are we not going to have renewables in our city? Like, what's happening with it? We need nuclear and gas. Like, we want renewables. If they get a number of those calls in, they're much more likely to speak up and object to the provincial plan. Yeah, the link to that letter. That letter is for groups to sign. And do you happen to have that link, David, that you could put in the chat?
I don't have it handy, no, but
maybe
we can make sure people can get it.
We should be able to follow up tonight with a recording. We've recorded the session recording link and a link to that letter. That is a group's signing letter, but we want individuals to also speak up. So I'm I'm not sure if we've got an individual sign-up petition or not.
No, there isn't an individual sign-up petition yet, but we're trying to get the letter out to councillors and the mayor, but also to as many, of us as we can get it to as climate activists
But
to shop it around and to be calling councillors.
Yeah, so if we have, but people will need a script to make it easier for them to call their councillors. So we have all your emails from registering for tonight. So hopefully we can keep that list and we can follow up with a little bit more information in that regard. Linda, is that
okay? Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I definitely can make phone calls.
okay?
Great.
That would be great. Who's your counselor, Linda?
Well, Chris Moyes, he's probably on side, but
You can't count on any of them. I'm sorry, but
okay.
they all need.
I take your point.
Yeah, this is a little bit outside their usual constituency things they deal with, right? This is challenging the provincial government's, energy plans. And, right now the city's trying to get money from a province to help with housing, construction, with a number of things. So there are many issues ongoing between the city and the province. So to add this one and to make it an issue, they need to know that their constituents are calling on them to do so. For those of you who haven't already signed on and filled in the budget survey that the city has circulated, and again, if anybody has the link handy, they could put it in the chat. It's open till the 31st. And there are also some consultations happening online on the budget. And it's important to get on there and to tick as number one in what you want to see the city funding. Environmental and climate action, I believe there's a line there is the choice in the question one about that, and make that number one. Maybe make transit number two, or housing number three, or recreation programs number three, whatever you want for number three. But for number one, make sure it's environment and climate, because we need to have a lot of people filling in the questionnaire that way. Right now, they don't tend to think that is the top concern of their constituents. And they're all running for re-election next fall, next October. So they're very much tuned into what the constituents are wanting to see from them, what kind of leadership they're wanting. So, okay, we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to make sure we've answered questions people have. And also, if you can come on Tuesday, would you please indicate so in the chat? And some of us should arrive a little bit early, like 11:30, set up our street theater. But we will need just plain audience people to come around 12 noon in order to put their money into the jars.
Yeah.
And
it's only an hour. It's just 12 to 1. It's quick. There'll be some good visuals, some props, and hopefully a bit of fun, and that'll be it.
Yeah. If anyone has kids, we'd love to have some kids coming as well. We will be inviting media, so there may be some media. We'll also be taking clips for social media of what people want to see our energy future look like in Toronto. So it's it'd be really great to see as many of you as possible. And if you know whether you can come, please indicate that. Okay, let's see.
There is a question about MPPs.
Yeah, okay, before we go to the next question, the budget link is there. Thank you, Alex. Please send it to some of your friends and neighbors. They might do nothing else political, but if they could fill in that questionnaire and put environment and climate in that number one question, they would be making a contribution. So see if you can spread the word about that consultation. And there are also dates that you can get on to a Zoom call, and if you can mention it on that, that would also be very helpful. Okay, there was who's the next person? Sorry. Lynn,
I was just saying that in the questions in the chat, there's a question about what about MPPs?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that question. And we've just started talking to, approaching the provincial party leaders and energy critics to see if they will take this up, if they will ask questions in the House, if they will take some leadership. I believe the Green Party leader, Mike, is onto this, but we want to make sure the NDP and Liberals are onto this as well. And yes, so we have started that. Do you want to say anything more about that, David?
No, I think again that this comes down to Ford, and Ford has very clearly stated what Ontario's energy future is. And that energy future is small modular reactors, 4 of them to begin with, new nuclear that may not be can-dos, but may be open to foreign designs again on new nuclear plants, both at Bruce and in Port Hope, massive amounts. The government plans to spend over $300 billion on nuclear plants. And with that it will just absolutely increase the cost of electricity.
Yeah.
It is also building new gas plants, which increase the cost of electricity. So behind all of this, we're dealing with Toronto, and it really is about Toronto's, future. Is Toronto at the forefront of an energy transition and everything that goes with that in terms of community development, local jobs, that a better lived environment, that changes in urban design, all of that. Or is it Ford calling the shots? And right now, I mean, it is Ford calling the shots. And so that's a long way of saying that MPPs are important. Because, I mean, at a number of fronts, this is going to be at the House. Bill 40 will come up for second reading. It may go to committee. There's a piece of it. There's all of these pieces in the puzzle. And so I think that MPs are important to talk to as well about the energy future we want for Ontario. Ontario is an outlier right now. And it is staggering. In fact, I mean, even to think about it in terms of just of emission targets, that Ontario is increasing its emissions more than any other province in the country, and has done so for 4 years in a row. There is no way that the government is ever going to achieve its 2030 climate targets, and it doesn't care. That's the point. It doesn't care. It's an outlier. But all over the world, you've got these, transformations and innovations around energy and technologies that support energy, and Ontario is just losing out. And that is going to cost us a lot of jobs in the future. You want to be at the front end of an energy transition. You don't want to be at the lagging end of it.
Thank you, David. And I want to add to that. First, a couple of things that are important to understand is that the IESO has not been informed of or been asked to adapt its plans to meet any kind of climate target or any kind of health specifications. So we are also contacting the new health, what's she called?
Medical Officer of Health.
Medical Officer of Health. There's a new one, and apparently she's good.
Dr. Multy.
At City of Toronto. So we're trying to involve them because they were asked to look at reliability and affordability, and as we can see, they're really manipulating the affordability thing, because absolutely the affordability is with renewables and conservation, absolutely the cheapest sources of energy. And we'll have a very good slide made into a big poster board for that on Tuesday. About the costs of the different forms of electricity. They're going to be indebting us forever, and they're hiding it from us. There's some very good things written and some good tweets that have been circulating on how we're being manipulated and lied to and being put into huge debt. So they're really not looking at affordability, which is actually one of the things they're supposed to look at. And they're definitely not looking at climate targets or health. And the other thing is that there is as you may be aware, the students, young people, have been taking the province to court over its climate target. And unfortunately, legal challenges take years. So it's just, being bumped from one higher level, appeals level back to the basic level to look at the issue again. It just takes every time it gets bumped to another level of the legal system is another 6 to 8 months to a year of trying to get a hearing and getting a ruling. So the Ford government has been able to ignore the fact that these young people are calling on the province to have serious climate targets, to increase their climate targets, to protect the future for young people. So, it's really shameful that they have not done so. So, anyway, we will have to wrap up in 5 minutes, but I want to make sure that that you've had a chance to put anything in the chat about what you would like to do to help out with this, and then we will try and get that follow-up information to you that you've requested, and the recording as well, so that you'll be able to share it. Anything else?
I just want to repeat the date, October 28th, which is next Tuesday, at City Hall in Toronto from 12 to 1. That's the media event. And if people are in Toronto and are free from 12 to 1, that would be great to see you there.
Yeah. And there's a question here from Ushnish about, what kind of data, like sort of, do we have a leaflet available, for example, on how the changes will increase costs for residential consumers? Do we have anything like that, David? I know we talked about the need for that at our last Friday meeting. Some of our groups are meeting every Friday to work on.
Yeah, I don't think that we have that now. We have the cost comparisons, and between small modular reactors, old reactors, solar, wind, and the differences, and even the IESO in a recent study came to the conclusion that solar and wind with storage is cheaper than nuclear and fossil gas. So even its own internal studies are showing that the cheapest way to go is not the way they're going.
Yeah. Thank you. I think with that, we need to turn off the recording. But before you leave, folks, I'd just like to have us a chance to, if